Hello everybody, I'm Gwen Campbell-Mindes. Welcome to Gwen's Bookish Ramblings. So, continuing with Margaret Frazer's Dame Frevisse Medieval Mysteries. Hey, look at that. For once I've been reading an actual original, book thing instead of the revamped ebooks. Anyways, so The Squire's Tale. The Squire's Tale continues this thing that Margaret Frazer is doing, which is that, like a lot of other mystery series, you have a cast of characters that does come back. In this case, this isn't like some books where, of course, you have a massive number of characters who sort of form the basis, but you have the regulars at the nunnery, and in this case, we bring back Robert. Now, Robert showed up in the first book, and he was in love with Sister Thomasine, and he impressed Frevisse in the first book with how commonsensical he was about the fact that, yes, he was in love with Thomasine, but he was also smart enough, wise enough, and good enough to, A, know that he wouldn't have landed her anyways because of the differences in their relative social stations, but also to accept what she wanted out of life and to say, okay, this is what she wants, and, yeah, he's in love with her, but if she doesn't want it, then she doesn't want it, and he's going to walk away from that. And that's the thing about Robert, is that every time we've seen him, he has been just this bastion of good common sense. Throughout this book, the central trouble in this book is that Robert has been, because he is a poor relation, distant relative, staying with, Walter Fenner on sufferance and so on and so forth, he was effectively married off because when a wealthy woman, Lady Blaunche, decided that she wanted him because he was an attractive young thing, he effectively got sold off. Because that's the thing about being a young, not powerful person in the medieval era amongst wealthy families is that, yes, young women would get sold off as chattel, but the fact of the matter is that if you're a young man and a squire and you don't have, and, between your social position and a whole bunch of other things, you really don't have anywhere to go, you can wind up being effectively sold off as chattel just as much as a young woman, and that's basically what happens to Robert. Now, yes, once he marries Blaunche, he becomes, lord of the manor and so on, but she wasn't his choice. He doesn't love her. And the fact of the matter is that he's eventually managed to sort of build himself a sort of sense of affection and so on, because she is the mother of his children, and he does love his children so much. That's one of the big things in this book. There's a description in the book of just how he had felt the first time he had felt each of his children, and that quality of being unable to imagine loving anyone or anything more than this, and how he felt it again with the next and again with the third. And he is, so he loves his children dearly, and for that alone he's built himself some affection for his wife. But the fact is that she is A, prone to hysterics, B, prone to micromanaging, and C, the biggest problem is that there is some land that her grandfather had managed to get, her grandmother had managed to be given these lands because the woman had been married to a member of another family. And, when this woman was widowed, she had the use of the lands for, the rest of her life as a widow. But once she died, the lands were supposed to revert back to the family. And what happened was instead that her son just hung on to them. And the Owlesleys took a rather dim view of this because the lands were given to the wife for the duration of her life. They had not been given away. It was that, as the wife, she had effectively become a member of the Owlesley family, and so she could have the use of the lands, but her son was not. But her son refused to give the lands back, and then he deeded the lands to Lady Blaunche, and Blaunche basically refused to give them back. And Robert has reached the point where, he's tried to reason with her, he's tried to convince her that they don't have legal title to these lands. And he has finally, at the start of this book, he's put his foot down and is insisting on negotiating with the Owlesleys to send his, to basically give the lands back and to work out whatever legal things that they have to work out in order to, appease this other family and, not be at risk of invasion or getting into a minor land war. And while Blaunche is basically irrationally freaking out and insisting, no, you should do this, you should be a man and attack them and stand up for my rights, and Robert's response is, what rights? It's not your land, it's not our land, and when you married me, you gave me control of everything, because, let's be honest, he is the man, and once she married him, she had handed over control of everything to Robert, and he has basically put his foot down. He has just finally said, I can't take it anymore. And Blaunche, throughout this entire book, is endless trouble. She has unnecessary hysterics. She tries to arrange for her oldest son, who was a son by a previous marriage. She tries to arrange for her son to kidnap a young woman because they had been fostering this young woman named Catherine. And Blaunche doesn't want the Owlesleys to get anything, whereas Robert has said, look, we have to make this deal, and if marrying Catherine off to one of them will get us this deal, will keep us from being permanently beggared and all this other stuff, then I will hand her over. And the thing about Catherine is she doesn't want to marry the other guy in the family. She doesn't really want to be sold. She has accepted it, and she's willing to do it because she cares deeply for Robert and believes that he is trying his best to do what is best for the largest number of people. But she doesn't particularly want to marry... Actually, she doesn't particularly want to marry anybody. Well, she does want to marry somebody, and that sort of comes in at the end, in a possibly not quite as good ending as it maybe ought to be, but anyways. And the thing is that, she's willing to marry against her will when Robert is trying to do something good with the marriage, but she doesn't want to marry her sort of foster brother, just because her foster mother, because it's a traditional thing that was done in a lot of families back then, was the fostering out, where you send your kids away from your home because it allows them to meet other people, because don't forget, travel was so very, very hard, isolation was easy, so you send your kids to other families where they get to meet other people, where they'll maybe manage to make a good match with somebody, where they can learn skills from, other people, and, there's a whole bunch of reasons for fostering out, and Catherine got fostered out, which, the advantage of that in this particular case was also that Robert would get to, give her dowry, get dowry monies and the value of marrying her off and so on. But anyways, so, you have this whole thing, and Blaunche is, like I said, she tried to convince her son to kidnap and force marry Catherine. She basically pushes her son and has her son convinced that the land is licitly theirs, which it is not. She eggs her son on constantly. She has constant hysterics about everything, and, is constantly shrieking at Robert about how he's, throwing everything away, and how dare he, and without you, without me, you would be nothing. And Robert just, he copes with it as best he can, but it is awful. It is exactly it is very much one of those worst case scenarios that come with arranged marriages. These two people who shouldn't be together and wind up together, and at least one of them would never have chosen this, but they're stuck with it. Because don't forget, this is the Middle Ages. Divorce is not a thing you're going to be able to do without applying to the Pope and providing a really, really good reason. And I just kinda don't like her isn't gonna cut it. Anyways, so we have this. And Blaunche gets murdered, and so does her son, and, Robert is gutted when the son is killed because he actually liked that kid. Everybody liked that kid. He had been behaving really, really badly, something that Frevisse remarks on a lot, but one of the other things that she remarks on is the fact that, yeah, he'd been behaving badly, but the fact that everybody seemed to care about him and everybody was upset, and really felt the loss, suggests that what this was that he was barely 20 years old, that it was kind of, he just hadn't had a chance to grow up out of being a sullen teenager yet. And the fact that he got killed before he had the chance just drives Frevisse to start trying to figure out the murder. And on top of which, though, is that Robert, when he finds his stepson murdered, he immediately turns to Frevisse and says, please find out who did it. And what's interesting, of course, is that nobody else there even knows that she's, an amateur sleuth in current parlance. They don't know that she does have a gift at figuring out murders. And so his actions seem to be just crazy to everybody. But, Frevisse, the thing is that this is the first time that somebody has asked Frevisse to figure out what's going on where she hasn't had her back go up about this immediately, because most of the time when people ask her, they are giving her orders for reasons that she feels are not, for justice and truth and figuring out what actually happened, but are for their own reasons, or she's being asked to do it, for whatever purpose, but it's not the reason why she believes it needs to be done, or else, of course, she's struggling against somebody who's trying to keep her from doing this. This is probably the first time in this series that she has been asked that she was willing to and wanted to, and was asked by somebody who was asking her out of a desire for the truth to be found, not, politics or self-aggrandizement. And so it's an interesting contrast, of course. The one thing in this book that gets me, throughout this entire book, Robert has struggled with the fact that he has fallen in love or in lust or whatever with Catherine, who is his ward. He has kind of had a hand in raising her, and yet somehow he has fallen in love with her, and I'm not sure where exactly this line is, but at the end of the book, she insists that she's in love with him, and Robert is extremely relieved, and that's the one thing, that pre-existing relationship that has turned into a romantic one, that I have something of a problem with. Everything else about that solution is neat and pat and lovely and wonderful. It's just, I don't know how much that pre-existing parent-child relationship there really was. So there is that. And that is all I can fit into my 15 minutes, so that's everything, and I will see you all next week.